Hello and welcome to Plot Mom. Thank you so much for joining me for another indie author interview. And for anyone listening later on, thank you for finding the channel. Please consider liking and subscribing. It helps us get noticed by the algorithms and to get more content to you. We are joined today by the amazingly talented Jed Herne, author of Across the Broken Stars and Fires of the Dead, among many other books. I peeked at your website and you have quite the collection. We'll be talking about your books, your writing process, your indie publishing journey. But first, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on, Allegra. I really appreciate it. This is the first time I've done like a live interview, so it feels like being on a talk show or something. So I'm an author from Perth, Western Australia, which is officially the most isolated capital city in the world, just to throw that little bit of trivia out there to begin with. I'm the author of 3 books at this stage: Fires of the Dead. Is that going to show up on the camera? Across the Broken Stars, and The Thunder Heist, which comes out on October 19th. And I write fantasy books generally set in very different worlds that I would like to think are fairly unique. And I also host the Wizards, Warriors, and Words podcast with Rob J. Hayes, Michael R. Fletcher, and Dirk Ashton. So
I amazing.
Basically like books. Thank you.
Definitely check it out. I kind of got lost in a rabbit hole watching them today, and was just kind of 3 or 4 hours I will never get back, and I'm quite happy to have gone.
That's pretty cool to hear. Thank you.
So let's warm up with a question about you. If you could live in any fictional world, and this could be ones you invented or others, where would you live and why?
It's a very good question, because a lot of the books and fictional worlds that I enjoy reading about, I would not want to end up in at all.
Yep, they're super dark and super grumpy.
Exactly. Trying to think. I think possibly Harry Potter, maybe. I mean, it does seem like there is
post-Voldemort Harry Potter.
Yeah, like that's probably a useful thing to specify. Harry Potter, when all the evil Dark Lords have gone away, and I can just enjoy going to Hogwarts without anyone trying to interfere with my schooling now. Not that Voldemort interferes with Harry's schooling anyway, because he always lets him do his exams like a good student.
Yeah, no, I do notice that anytime that there's trouble, it's never specifically during exams.
Yeah, Voldemort respects the school calendar. Like, he's not a monster.
Apparently. So, can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Sure. So I'll start with The Thunder Heist, since that's the one that is the most present in mind at the moment. It's very shiny as I hold that up to the camera, but anyway, I'm sure you can see that. So it's coming out in a couple of weeks. I still got a few things to organize with it, but basically I describe it as a ocean punk fantasy book set in this world where people live on these floating cities in this huge sea. And the reason why they live out there is because the land surrounding the sea is full of monsters. So to step on the land is a death sentence. And this particular book in the series follows Kef Cutmark, who is a pirate returning to a city that has some traumatic memories for her. And she's coming back to the city to steal this device that channels energy from lightning to power the city. So it's sort of partly a heist story, partly a pirate story, partly a bit of a revenge thing as well.
So if you kind of the book I just published, NaCl Eye of the Storm, is an arcane punk pirate heist story about revenge.
Did we just write the same book? Maybe we did.
Apparently we have just written the same book. Clearly
Great. I will have to check it out.
Yes.
So that comes out in October 19th or so. It's got a couple of interior illustrations as well, which I'm very excited about. I'll see if I can show you one on the camera now.
I would love to see one.
It's got a beautiful series logo by my friend Tina Hahn.
That is gorgeous.
Like a metallic-looking octopus thing. It's got a map at the front.
Very neat.
Yeah, lots of other stuff as well. The boat map as well. So
very smart. I did not include that kind of stuff, and I kind of regret it, but this book was already like 180,000 words, and I was just like, nope, done, go away.
Oh wow, that's a hefty That is a hefty book for sure.
Yeah.
This comes in more on the 60,000 fast clip side of things, but
Much more reasonable. Honestly, I would not suggest writing 180,000 word door stoppers. It's a little bit more trouble than they're worth.
Yeah, it seems intense. Like the longest thing I've written is 110,000 words, and I remember just thinking like, oh gosh, this is so big. Like
my debut was 240, and I'm full of regrets.
Yikes! That is fairly brutal.
So, when did you start writing?
I started writing when I was 15, and basically I was in high school at the time. One of my friends had gone away over the holidays and written a short story that was like twice as long as anything we had to write in class. And I read it and I thought, oh, that sounds pretty cool. I like stories. I've written some short stuff before. Maybe I should try writing a novel. And just from that point, like I started writing, and about 360 days later, I had the first draft of The Aeon Academy, which is the first book I wrote. And yeah, basically then I was able to turn around to my friend and be like, one up on you, buddy.
That's fantastic. Sometimes competition is just how we get to writing. I feel like most of what I write is out of spite.
I certainly didn't write it out of spite, but it was. I do feel a very debt of gratitude towards him for just showing me that, like, hey, you can actually write stuff that your teacher doesn't force you to write. So yeah, and then from then I never really stopped.
So how did it evolve? How do you think you've changed as a writer since you first started?
I would like to think I'm better.
Always hope.
Fingers crossed. I think I don't know. I think throughout the process, you kind of go through. I forget where I've heard this. I've heard it from a few different sources, but essentially, there's like 4 different stages of learning something, which is where you have unconscious incompetence, which is where you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know that it's bad. Then you move to conscious incompetence, which is where you know what you're doing is bad,
but you don't know how to fix it.
But you don't know how to fix it still, correct? And then you move to conscious competence, which is where you know what you're doing and it's good. And then you sort of move to unconscious competence, which is where, again, you sort of like don't know what you're doing, but it's good. You kind of get to this stage where it becomes, you don't have to think about like the structure, or you don't have to think about like, oh, in this dialogue, I'm having this character have this goal towards here and this character have this goal towards here. So I suppose on like a very abstract, broad level, that's sort of how I've seen things progressing in my own writing, in the sense of earlier stuff, I sort of didn't know what I was doing and I thought it was good. Then I realized it was bad, but I didn't know why it was bad. And then I sort of figured out like how to fix those issues using some more of the craft stuff. I think like for me, a big evolution came from reading John Truby's The Anatomy of Story, K.M. Weiland's Outlining Your Novel, Structuring Your Novel, and also Story by Robert McKee, which I don't know if you can see it, but they're all on my back shelf there somewhere. Can't really see them. Oh, here they are. They're here. Yep. Basically, yeah, reading craft books accelerated things a lot for me, because I think I have a very analytical, structured mind, and I'd always assumed that writing was a very just loose and creative, artistic thing, which it totally is. But you can also use...
But you have to write the way you write. That's the thing, that like there isn't... It can be as structured or not as you need to actually get the words on paper. Exactly. I think that's something that people don't like, no, you have to do it this way, or you have to do it that way. You don't. How do you do it? What's your process?
But having said that, it is very useful to force yourself to try things that are opposite to what you've been doing so far, because you might never know what is going to change it for you. And that's what happened for me. Like I'd just written, like first draft of the Aeon Academy took me 360 days to write. Worked on it for a few years, didn't really get that far with it, rewrote it a few times. Then I read Outlining Your Novel and Structuring Your Novel by K.M. Weiland, which I highly recommend. Like I cannot recommend that enough. And as a result of that, I was able to write the first draft of Across the Broken Stars in 60 days. which is a big improvement on 360 days.
Yes.
And from that moment, I was sold on outlining.
Absolutely. I feel much the same way. Like, I went from it taking me 20 years to write a book to it taking me 2 weeks to write a book. And for me, outlining was the thing that absolutely, like, even when I don't follow the outline, just knowing that it's there, it's like a ladder that I can go back to and like cling to when I'm not quite sure what's supposed to happen, is incredibly it's comforting.
If you don't mind me asking, how does the 2 weeks for a book thing work? Because I hear that and I'm like, I would love for that to be the case for me, because it still takes like probably half a year for me to get a book out.
So I do a lot of co-authoring. That is my kind of cheating the system, because I'm only writing half the book.
Mhm.
But we write in a zero draft and then first draft form. So when I'm talking about 2 weeks is our zero draft. We just kind of get the words on paper, and they're messy and they're nasty and they're like they're often atrocious. But once we have that structure, once we know exactly what happens, once we've tried out the characters and gotten a much better sense of them, because I almost like I don't know about for you, but at least for me, I don't really get a sense of a character until I put them through hell. And it's hard to put them through hell before the book starts. So I
can
always
do that as well.
like to go back to the very beginning right after I've written, and I just realized that if I'm going to go back and rewrite significantly anyways, which is my process, I might as well get that first draft done as quickly as humanly possible and accept that it's going to be bad.
Fair enough. So how long is it then from you starting to, say, outline a book, I don't know if you outline or not, until like it's done and it's published and out in the world?
It depends on the length of the book. The one I wrote in 2 weeks was 45,000, so it was just a novella. It's now gotten to about 75,000. So we wrote that in the first 2 weeks of July. Took August off because I was writing something else. So we've now spent about a month adding about 30,000 words slowly on and off while working on other projects, and then we'll probably spend another month editing. So from start to finish, it will probably take about 3 months of work.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah.
It's not bad. But again, I have co-authors, so half the work is theirs, and it definitely does speed up the process. So we're probably in line with the 6 months to write a book. It takes the time it takes. Like, you can't really rush a novel.
And also the cool thing about books as well is like once you've done it, like
it's so much easier to do it again.
Well, yeah, that also, and then also the fact that like people can read this thing for the next like 300 years or until the earth explodes or whatever. So it's kind of, yeah, I don't know. I feel that gives me a little bit of liberation in the sense of like, if it takes an extra month, it takes an extra month, but it's going to be up forever. So you probably want it to be worth it.
Like, there is a sweet zone between taking the time you need and spinning your wheels, finicking with the like specifics. You have to be able to abandon your artwork and understand that it will never be perfect. But at the same time, you can have a standard, and if it's not up to that standard, working on it longer is totally legitimate.
Oh no, my books are perfect anyway, so
of course.
It doesn't matter if I take only 2 weeks to do it.
If only there were like a perfect meter that just beeped when your book was perfect.
Well, like, funny you mentioned that, because I've seen a couple of, I haven't used them, but there's a couple of deep learning softwares out there right now that do claim to be able to analyze your book and give it like a bestseller index based on how similar it is to the books in their system and everything. So maybe that's
interesting. That is terrifying, honestly. I don't know if I want a computer to tell me about my inadequacies, but so you are indie published, and I know that you are in this year's SPFBO, which is the self-publishing fantasy blog off. What made you decide to jump into that ring? Have you done that before? Like, or has this been your first year?
You can blame it entirely on Rob J. Hayes, who is one of my co-hosts in Wizards, Warriors, and Words. I think I discovered him through SPFBO last year, because he'd made it to like the last 10 finalists or something impressive like that. And I read his book Never Die. I loved it. Reached out to him to interview him, and he was saying how Spiffbo was a big influence on sort of building his audience, and also it had been a really fun way to connect with other authors. So I looked up when the next one would be opening. I scheduled it in the calendar. I was checking the page constantly to make sure that I got in on the first day, because it goes very quickly these days, which is pretty crazy. And yeah, this is the first time I've entered it. I entered Across the Broken Stars, which has unfortunately been eliminated from the competition now.
Condolences.
But them's the breaks, so not too much of a big deal. But it's been good fun to connect with all the authors and everything.
I only found out about it the day that it was the last day of that it was accepting submissions.
Yeah.
And I think I was number 294 or something.
Oh, wow. You really snuck in.
Just by the skin of my teeth.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what it was until after I had submitted. It's a fun ride.
Yeah.
We are halfway through. I'm still in the ring for now.
Oh, nice. Best of luck. Hopefully
Thank you.
Get through the different stages.
My blog is going to be announcing another one any day now, so I'm just preparing myself for the worst.
Yeah, I was a bit like that coming through it as well. I mean, I don't really care hugely what reviewers say about it and everything, but definitely there's a part of you that is refreshing that page constantly and waiting to see the dreaded announcement that your book has been cut.
Andy Pelican and I do a D&D podcast together every Monday called Deranged and Questing, and we're both in the same group, so we're competing against each other. And apparently we both have two very different ways of opening the blog post. I go scroll all the way down to see if my book is listed, and then we'll read, because I can't read if I don't. And he reads very slowly, line by line, so he doesn't have to see the bottom.
I am way more efficient with that. I just hit Control Find and search my name on the page.
That's fair. That's probably much cleverer. So I have a question about being an indie author. How do you think that has changed your approach to writing? Has it at all?
That's an interesting question. I don't think anyone's asked me that before, or indeed, I don't think I've ever thought about that before. I suppose I don't think it's really changed my approach to writing, because it was sort of what I started off doing. But I think if you're asking in terms of what my mindset sort of is approaching it, it's, I suppose, it makes me focus a lot on trying to build an audience of people who ostensibly like my stuff and are interested in sort of what I'm doing. So I suppose from that comes a fairly big commitment to my email newsletter, which has a lot of fans on it, which I'm very grateful for. And that's really good for getting the word out there about new books or new promotions or anything of that nature.
I may have to ask you back on here to talk to me a bit about that, because I am so bad at newsletters. They are my Achilles heel.
Fair enough. Well, I'm not sure if I've mastered it either. But I do feel that it has sort of been moving in the right direction. And definitely in terms of sales and stuff, it has seemed to be the most reliable platform for that. And I think it's because, if someone's joining your email newsletter, it's because they really do want to hear from you. They like
your books.
Yeah, exactly. And I try to make it as best of an experience as possible. So there's free stories when people sign up, and you get an insight into my writing process and behind the scenes stuff and all those sort of things. And it's really fun to communicate with the readers that way. And it, particularly in the last few months, it's been very enjoyable to start getting a lot of responses to my emails, because you can really get a sense of, I suppose, intimacy is maybe the wrong word for it, but you get good one-on-one conversations through email that feel a bit different to something public on Twitter or on YouTube or whatever.
Absolutely.
So, yeah,
I kind of get that through. I have a Discord for both this channel and kind of just general, and it's been really wonderful both getting to know other writers and my readers, and it's quite enjoyable to have those kind of conversations. So kind of moving to the craft side of things, how do you approach world building and story building? Do ideas come to you fully formed? Do you take inspiration from the world around you? How does it happen?
Sure. Bit of column A, bit of column B, I suppose. Some stories definitely come to me basically all the way there. Across the Broken Stars was definitely one of them, where I was on exchange studying in London a few years ago, and it pretty much just like hit me in one night, and by the next 3 hours, it was like 90% done. Which I was like, oh, this is great. Like, have this, every couple of months, and I'll be set. Hasn't really happened quite like that. I do think that ideas in some regard are quite cheap, and it's not so much about like coming up with the ideas, but more about figuring out how they're going to make a good story. Because probably the same for you and probably the same for most people is, if you're a writer, you don't struggle with ideas. You struggle with like turning the ideas into reality.
Struggle with time to write all the ideas.
That as well, right? So in that case, your question really is like, how do you figure out what ideas are worthwhile ruminating and developing? And then once you've got them, like, how do you turn those into a book that you can hold in your hands, or read on the Kindle, or listen on the audiobook or whatever. So yeah, for me, I suppose I'll kind of try to let the initial ideas gestate for a bit. And most of my story ideas have been sort of bubbling around there for a while. Then the next most important stage for me is the outline. I'm a big outliner. I try to know everything that's going to happen in my story before I start writing it, which to some people probably sounds very reductive and a little bit boring maybe. But for me, yeah, not at all. For me, it's just taking all of the fun creativity you have in the first draft and just doing it in a way that actually lets you figure out if the story is going to work. Because I don't want to reach the 90% mark of my story and realize it's not working. I want to do that months earlier with way less effort invested in it as well. Plus also, I find that your first ideas are usually not the best. Like, they usually can be improved. And by outlining, it sort of is giving you like this second first draft. So that when you actually are writing your first draft, you've already kind of like improved upon it already, if that makes sense.
I do something very similar with my zero drafts, where I'm kind of just writing to get the ideas out and to kind of figure out what they are. Do you ever go off script once you've outlined?
Yes, but it's becoming increasingly rare these days.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely do. I'm probably like a more on a scene and character level, and less so on an overall plot. But yeah, I'll often find like, oh, this character can be changed, or I can add in this other scene here. But I suppose like the majority of the structure, I usually am not starting to write it unless I'm pretty happy with how the structure is. And as a result, the structure generally doesn't change hugely. Having said that, with the Thunder Heist, I don't think this is a bit of a spot. But basically, once you reach like around about the 60% mark, some stuff starts happening structurally that I didn't necessarily plan on doing in a couple of my initial outlines. Although I think from memory, I did plan for a little bit of it. That's so vague.
I'm very interested in this book, and I'm going to like leave here and just go like find it and add it to my like queue of books as soon as it comes out, because the fact that it's that similar and it also has a storm motif in the title, I'm very curious about this.
What's the name of your one again?
NaCl, Eye of the Storm.
Eye of the Storm. Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
Yep. Also pirates, also on tiny little islands, also monsters in the deep. Again, clearly there's a new subgenre rising.
We won't say who it was.
Yes. Okay, so next question I have for you is fantasy your genre of choice, or have you like thought about deviating, doing some sci-fi, doing anything else, or is it like, is fantasy the love?
Fantasy is my first love, and it's 90% of what probably more like 80% of what I read. At some stage, I may do some sci-fi things, and I do quite enjoy a bit of the you think it's fantasy, but it's actually sci-fi vibe as well, which is like pretty much what Across
It's
the
like
Broken Stars is.
90% of what I write. My epic fantasy
Yeah.
is actually sci-fi. I don't think anyone's noticed yet.
No, and like ultimately that they are
Yeah,
interchangeable.
they are.
Yeah, it's just a matter of marketing, really. But yeah, I think fantasy is more what I enjoy. Well, possibly might write some sci-fi in the future, but yeah, I'm like very content writing fantasy. I just love it so much, and I think the real benefit of fantasy is that you can do any kind of story you want, but you can also have magic in that. You can have a spy thing, you can have a romance, you can have a heist thing, like I've done with Thunder Heist, and it just makes it more richer having it in fantasy. And also, like, all stories are fantasy anyway because none of them are actually real. They're all made up. Sorry to
Yep.
spoil it for you, but they're all fake. So
All
fantasy is just
fiction
honest about that.
is fake. Yes.
Mm.
So every writer I've ever written has this like crazy, I've ever written with or talked to or anything, has this like crazy zany idea they've had at the back of their head for forever, but haven't written, whether it's because they are not a good enough writer yet, or because they haven't wanted to dedicate the time, or if or it's so crazy that no one's ever going to read it. Do you have one, and if so, what is it?
I love this question. I'm going to steal this to ask other authors. I hope you don't mind.
Not at all.
Okay, so there's one which is more of a recent crazy idea, and then there's another one which is probably more of a longer term ambitious thing. I'll go with the other one, which is a bit longer. So I'm working on this series called The Drowning Sands at the moment, and essentially the story opens with a couple of hundred humans huddled on top of this gigantic spire of rock in the desert, while all around them these floodwaters rise up.
Excuse me, I've already written this.
Oh, stop stealing my ideas, Allegra. This is so rude. You invite me on here for a pleasant chat, and then this is just all telling you that my ideas are gone.
Really going on. Okay, go on.
So I think we'll start to deviate in a bit. If you have this specific thing, something's up. But basically how it works is like there's this flood that's sort of drowning the entire world, and only like a couple of hundred humans are left alive on top of this really tall pillar of rock in the middle of a desert. And one of those is this guy called Frey, who is this like extremely powerful magician. And he has sort of caused this flood to happen. Everyone else on the rock is like sort of terrified by him because he's just this sort of tyrannical person who has essentially doomed the world. And as he kind of looks over on the world and his legacy be destroyed completely, he reflects on how it happened, and like he feels that he owes an explanation to the other people atop the rock, why he has like done this, and he just wants them to understand like what happened essentially. So he sort of starts like talking to them about his story, and it basically kind of it's intended. This might change a bit, but it's going to be essentially like a 7-book series of him sort of recounting his life from his time as like a young boy who was like forbidden to use magic in this desert tribe, to becoming sort of where he is at the end, this sort of tyrannical dictator leader. But through telling that story, he realizes that there's actually clues there that could prevent them from being drowned by the flood. And essentially then it becomes this sort of two-pronged thing of you seeing that his tragic arc of going from just this extremely sympathetic young, just like common boy in this desert tribe to like what leads him to want to sort of like take over the world and everything. But through doing it, he like starts to uncover how they can stop this force that is drowning the world. And yeah, essentially it's going to sort of be like flashing back and forth between these timelines. And also there may be a little bit of unreliable narration in there as well.
I was about to ask if it was going to be unreliable narration, because unreliable narration is probably like one of my just like, I love it so much, give it to me all the time things.
Lie to me characters. Deceive
exactly.
me.
Tell me things that at the very end that reframe everything that I've read so far. That is my dream in every single book. I'm expecting it at the end. I'm always sad when it's not actually the case. just for reference, mine
Mm.
is mine is part of the history story about a man born in a desert without magic in a highly magical society that goes and hunts magic and causes the end of the world.
Is it actually?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Clearly, like
What is this?
we might need to collaborate on something because our brains seem to work in the same way. Yes, it's published. It's in my novel. I am not lying about it.
Wow. Okay, that's kind of crazy. Mine is not published yet. The first book is written, but I think it does need some revisions because, yeah, I suppose the real struggle with this is making sure that the present story and then the flashback aspects are equally compelling,
Yes.
without being contradictory and yeah, and also there's like other stuff I want
I
to
feel
set
like
up
the framing device of telling a story can work really, really well or really, really badly. And
Mm,
there is that, like, I love The Name of the Wind. It's a
yeah.
fantastic book, but it took me forever to get through the first chapter or two. Like later on, I really liked the parts of the narration that happen in the present, but the first jump was a very difficult sell for me. So absolutely get it right
Interesting.
there. But it's so much fun with that kind of framing device. So
Yeah, it's just something different.
if you we're entering into NaNoWriMo season. I'm actually teaching a class for NaNoWriMo with a whole bunch of new authors.
Cool.
So next question is, if you had a new author who had never written a book but really wanted to, what would your advice be? Like,
Hmm. See, this is an interesting question because there's, on one regard, I could answer this from the perspective of like, if I was giving advice to my 15-year-old self before
mm-hmm.
writing the Aeon Academy, then what would I say? And then there's the question of, is that different to giving advice to someone else? I don't know. I think probably the biggest thing is two things. Is just to like write something that you enjoy and like enjoy every stage of the process. It's such a special thing to write a first book. It's
Yes.
probably not going to get published, but that should actually liberate you and allow you to do whatever you want, really enjoy the process, soak it all up. The amount that you're going to learn from it is going to be incredible. And then also it will give you a better appreciation for other books as well. And then the second thing with that is like, that's sort of the cloud stuff up here, I suppose. And then in the more dirt realm, I think it's just consistency is the big thing. If you actually want to get a book done, making time every day, whether it's like 30 minutes, 60 minutes or more if you can, like if you can write for 30 to 60 minutes a day, you'll have a first draft of a book done in a year, unless you do something massive. So yeah, I think a lot of people who sort of want to write books but say they don't have the time and everything, you'd probably need to be figuring out a way that you can have 30 to 60 minutes, whether it is first thing in the morning, last thing at night. Generally, I find that those two times are the easiest because either, you're fresh, or if you're doing it at night, everyone else is asleep.
I'm a night writer.
Yeah.
I write between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning.
I used to do that. Not to 2 p.m., but like probably 9 to 10. I couldn't do it. Like I'm a very morning person now. But yeah, I think those are the biggest things. Just like really enjoy the process. Actually, three things. Really enjoy the process and just do whatever you want. Don't put any pressure on yourself for it to be perfect or it to be published, because it probably won't, but it's fine. You won't accept that for yourself, which is fine as well. I didn't accept it for myself either, and that's okay. And it might be published as well. Who knows? And then also just consistency with, trying to write every day. And I know that can be hard, but it just makes it easy, because if you do it as a habit, it happens whether you want it to or not. If you're just relying on like doing a day of binge writing, which can work, but I've never found that successful for me, it's going to be 10 times harder, I think. So yeah, just those three things.
Okay, a couple last questions before we go. And these are kind of getting into the tea. What's your most hated trope?
I don't hate any tropes, actually.
Excellent answer. That is the correct answer. You pass. Trope is not a bad word.
Yeah, I think hating books because they have tropes in it is a bit like hating trees because they have wood.
Yeah.
Like,
no,
it's a building block of it. And building blocks can be used well, they can be used poorly. I've my kind of formal training is as an architect, and I work at a playground designing company when I'm not writing books. And the same materials can either make something that's amazing or something that's crappy. And the only differentiating factor is how you're using it. So tropes are just tools. Some tools get overused. And yeah, you just got to make sure that you know what you're doing and it works for your story.
On the flip side, though, is there anything
Yes.
that if you find it in a book, you're just like, yes, sold, I want to read that right now? Is there anything that you love?
Well, probably if it's by one of my favorite authors, that would help. I think, possibly really good magic systems combined with very unique worlds. I think, so there's a difference between tropes and cliches. Cliches are kind of like overworn tropes, which can still be done fine. But one of the cliches that I do prefer to move away from is kind of the stories take place in medieval Europe setting. There's knights and kings, blah, 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 blah. I really like stories that do something different. Like I think I mentioned, I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you before we started recording or once we were on the air, but I'm reading The Shadow Saint by Jed Herne at the moment. And I love it. It's a fantasy story set in like kind of a probably like 1900s-esque era with guns and steamships and newspapers and yeah, just that more sort of flintlock stuff. I actually, maybe that's the thing that really sells it to me, is fantasy with a slightly more modern setting. So where there's more kind of technology and guns and everything like that. So sort of your flintlock stuff, I suppose. Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, I have a fondness for that as well. Like I feel like since being a teenager, my like perfect fantasy setting, the technology had just been slowly growing a decade at a time.
Interesting.
All the way into like science fiction. Now I'm just like, I'm done. I'm done. I want to read science fiction now.
Can I ask, because I'm still trying to figure this out for me, what is it for you that appeals to the more modern fantasy settings? Like, why do you enjoy that or be drawn to it?
I think it's because especially for me, the environmental degradation in our current world has been such a emotionally impactful thing to me. So everything that borders on the Industrial Revolution, on using resources in a way that potentially isn't that long-sighted, into this kind of consumer mentality that damages the environment, or magic, or a culture, anything like that, really appeals to me on a like allegorical level. So I think I like that slightly more modern fantasy because of that.
Interesting. See, for me, it's just I sort of hate kings. I don't like the monarchy, and I'm kind of annoyed when I read stories
that are
most
of them that I encounter.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I look, I don't have anything against Queen Elizabeth. If you're listening, I don't have anything against you. Please don't send those cards with the funny hats after me or whatever. But it's more just the case of I dislike stories where they're like, oh, look how special this character is because of their birth. I'd much rather support characters that are special because of what they do and the hard choices they make under, extraordinary pressure and everything. And that's why I do prefer those stories that are set in more modern times, where I feel like, medieval fantasy can sometimes fall into the trappings of like, oh, like, look how glorious our main character, the king, is because they are born into being noble. And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that.
No, I want to read about disaster characters and disaster settings, and I want them to make a ton of mistakes and probably make the world worse before they make it better. Like that is my preferred. Is everything going wrong? I'm happy. I'm smiling. I'm grinning. I'm like sipping tea while reading a book where everyone is miserable. Right on. I have a strange aesthetic. It's either very, very funny sci-fi or just tragic fantasy. So what are you working on right now?
At the moment, I am working on an interactive fiction game for Choice of Games, which is a text adventure, so no graphics, no sound effects, but just like one of your old choose your own adventure style stories. And it's called The Siege of Trebelin. It's a fantasy thing where you are This is ironic that I was just having a big rant about kings, because in this story, you are the king, queen / monarch of this medieval city, and you basically have to protect it from the siege that it's under, make decisions to stop the city getting overrun, deal with all the internal politics and stuff that's going on. Oops, I've dropped my pen. And basically just experience what it would be like to rule a medieval city. And
I would deeply enjoy this.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable.
Resource management is my gig. Like, I only play resource management games.
This is right up your alley then. If you're interested, I can probably send you, once we get the beta of it up, you can have an early copy if you want to have a look at it.
I would absolutely love that. Like, I still play the same city building game from my Windows 95 computer back in olden days.
Oh, wow.
Because it's the harshest city building game I've ever met. Everything will catch on fire if you turn away for 2 seconds.
Oh my gosh, that's pretty hardcore. So Siege Traveling has been good fun, and also it's sort of given me another world that I really want to write in, because it's sort of this plant-based magic system where the city is more this. Oh, there's a cat. Yes. Hello,
she
kitty.
Has decided to be part of this show.
Welcome. What's her name?
And now she has decided to leave. Her name is Vin, after the Mistborn protagonist.
That's so cool. Oh, that's awesome.
Because she has a little mistcloak.
No way. You gotta
She's
send a photo.
All gray and has little white toes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's so cute. Wow, okay. Just got completely distracted, but worth it.
Cats are distracting.
Yeah.
So I think that's about the end of the questions that I had. If anyone in the audience has any questions, I'd be absolutely delighted to pull them up. Erica, you had asked, what's your favorite story trope to read?
Cool.
Right when I had asked that, because we are co-authors and think in exactly the same speed, apparently. So what are you reading right now as a kind of...
Sure. Reading the God of Prayer. Not the God of Prayer. The Shadow Saint by Jed Herne at the moment. It's just a absolutely. If you've read the God of Prayer, which was the first book in this series, you'll know that Jed Herne writes absolutely ballistic, like off his head stuff, which I just froth over. We're talking like hundreds of a pantheon of gods, and there's like for the Shadow Saint, there's like this election going on, and you're seeing it from 3 different point of views, and like one of them is a spy, and you don't know what they're doing, and I'm only halfway through, but I can tell that there's something is interesting is happening with them. And there's like undead skeletons walking around this city, and people made from like hundreds of thousands of worms that have this psychic consciousness, and basically it just feels like he's sort of mashed up all of the things that both himself and myself find really fun with fantasy, and someone probably went like, oh, you can't do this and this and this, and he's like,
yes, I can.
Why not? Let's just chuck it all in there. And it works really well. It just feels so insanely dense. Like, it just feels like 20 novels in one, and I love it. Like, it's probably not for like if you're a more early reader of fantasy, but you've probably found this as well, Allegra, is like once you just read a lot of fantasy, you just like start to crave new stuff that is just extremely on that edge.
That you can just not
on that edge.
Connect to anything else, and are just like, okay, no, that's its own thing. That's it.
Yes.
Just okay, you went there. That is all I want out of fantasy.
Absolutely, and also cheeky plug. We're interviewing Gareth in a few weeks on Wizards, Warriors, and Words too.
I will have to check that out. So question from Todd. Do you have a daily word count when drafting?
Thanks for your question, Todd. This is so cool how you can just like bring them up on the screen. This feels so professional. Yes, generally when I am in the first stage, when I'm doing the first draft of a novel, I aim for around about like I aim for about 2,000 words a day. Realistically, I get more like 1,500. I'll pull up, I have a spreadsheet that I keep all of my daily word counts in. And basically that allows me to know like if I'm on track for where I need to be. It kind of shows me like how productive I'm being overall. And yeah, just looking through the spreadsheet now, yeah, for the last book that I was writing, it was averaging about like 1,500 words a day or so. And yeah, so I generally try to write every day and then record my word count in that. And I find that gamifying it in that way is so useful for my productivity because you just have like way more motivation to see those numbers tick up. It's good.
I've been so bad at that recently, and my productivity has just tanked because of it. Then again, Erica and I sat down the other day planning on doing some planning, and we wrote 8,000 words in an evening. So
What?
that happened this
That's
week.
insane.
So.
I think the best I've done in one day is like maybe 4.5. And that was like, I did 2 days of that, and I thought, this is my new normal, and then it hasn't happened since. But
Yep.
8,000 is crazy.
I think our max working together was 12 once. Once we did 12. It was an all-day affair, and I don't think I ate or hydrated that entire day. It was kind of a fugue that I don't entirely remember. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's great. It's when you get that like just push of just okay, no, I know exactly where I'm going, just full speed ahead. It's it really like it is a feeling that you want to have again and again and again. Like,
sure.
This thing that I always kind of tell people when they're struggling to write their first 250 words, first 500 words, that every time you beat that goal, every time where you write more than you thought you could write, it just tells it changes something in your mind that suddenly says, no, this is doable. Yep. I can do this. I did it.
Absolutely.
Same with writing a novel. The moment you've written one novel, the chances you'll write another novel, I think, go up exponentially because suddenly your mind is like, okay, no, I can do that.
And also, it's just a very addictive pastime.
It is super addictive. You get to basically just stroke your own imagination like a cat on your lap and you're an evil villain. It's great. Question from Erica. What is the hardest thing for you when it comes to writing?
Probably editing. I really enjoy the outlining and first draft writing stages. And I do enjoy a lot of editing as well because it is nice to just sort of have it there and to be able to polish it a bit. But I don't enjoy, actually, more specifically, rewrites. I don't enjoy having to.
Oh my God. Revisions are horrible. Editing is fine.
Editing is fun. Revisions and rewrites, different ball game. Mostly because I'm just annoyed at myself for like not seeing it the first time around. But yeah, I much prefer to sort of get all of the bugs ironed out as much as possible in the outline. So then from there, it can be a fairly straightforward process and everything. Having said that, I do love sitting down with my editor and going through, who's a really good writer in her own right, and going through like a 3-hour meeting to just talk about all the things that need to be fixed with it. Because that is like, I really enjoy getting that other insight on my story. Having said that, I much prefer it when it's like, hey, you could add this little thing in here and it would make it cooler, as opposed to, hey, you could rewrite this chapter and it would make it better, that sort of thing.
Yeah, nope, I've been there, done that. I hate revisions. Now it's like, I would much rather, I went from completely winging it and pantsing it to outlining specifically because I was done. I was done with writing 300,000 words, realizing there was a logical inconsistency on page 1 and having to toss 300,000 words in the toilet, flush, and start writing. Yes. 3 times.
Ouch. No.
3 times. Oh,
that's so
Same
brutal.
book. Almost over a million words have now been on my last gift series to get Where Shadows Lie. I had to write 1 million words to get there.
I haven't even written 1 million words for all of my books, so that's crazy. Oh my gosh.
Don't ever do that. Just anyone out there, don't do it.
You scared me straight.
Outline a little if you're going to write an epic. We have another question. How much time do you spend thinking about your book when you aren't writing?
Thanks for the question. Less than I used to. I feel that back for the early books, it was kind of all I thought about. Like constantly in my mind would be this tract of like, oh, what's this next thing going to be? And like, what's going to happen next? I'm like, what's the story? And like, I don't know, maybe I've just got like more on my plate these days, marketing wise and other job wise and everything. But not a huge amount. Like generally sort of when I sit down to write, I'm like totally in the zone. I can pick up where I'm off before, and because it's very habitual, it just sort of clicks for me in that moment. I would only really be sort of like thinking and playing over my story ideas if I'm like quite stuck with something. And then I would sort of be like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk and like dedicate some processing time to thinking this over, or like I'm not going to drive with any music or podcasts on. I'm just going to think about this story thing. But consciously, I don't really think about it a huge amount when I'm not writing. I think subconsciously, it's always there. And
Always.
yeah, you will notice it because like I'll be having a shower or whatever, having not thought about my stories in a while, and then bang, like here's 3 novels, like here you go, or like here's another character for this thing. So yeah, consciously, not a huge amount of non-dedicated time. Subconsciously, probably all the time.
Well, we are approaching about 50 minutes and we've had an absolutely fun time here. So I'm going to close up, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Apparently we are the same author. That's slightly disturbing to realize, but the more the merrier, as long as we're writing weird settings and are, exactly across the world from each other.
Yeah.
You can have one.
Here's the thing: all authors use the same alphabet, so technically
true.
Everyone's plagiarizing.
It is true. Everyone's using the same words over and over and over again. So, Jed, how do people find you? How do people support you? Give us your plug.
Probably the best place to go is my website, jedherne.com. You can go on that website and you can find out more about my books there. Also, like I mentioned a bit earlier, if you sign up to my email newsletter, that's probably the number one way to kind of stay updated with my stuff. And when you sign up, you can get some free stories as well, which I'd like to think are quite good. And so you can get that. I think there's like a button in the top right of my website that says like free story, and you can sign up with that. Otherwise, you can just Google like Ascendant Flames by Jed Herne and Language of Lies by Jed Herne, and they're both 2 free short stories that lead into Across the Broken Stars and Fires of the Dead, respectively. Fires of the Dead, before I forget, is only 99 cents for the next couple of days on Amazon. And you can also pick up the audiobook for like $1.99, narrated by yours truly, for the next couple of days. And then, if you enjoy like watching authors ramble on YouTube, you might want to check out the Wizards, Warriors, and Words podcast, which I host with Rob J. Hayes.
Very good.
Michael R. Fletcher. Thank you, Allegra. I'll slip you the $5 for that referral later. And Dirk Ashton as well. And we're up to like about 10 episodes, and it's been an absolute blast. Like, I've been able to learn a lot about the craft of writing. They're all really fun to talk with. And I kind of feel like I've locked my way into this because compared to the other hosts, like I have not been doing this as long, and it has been really kind of them to let me into it. And now I have a ton of blackmail material on them because as soon as the camera goes off, things get crazy and it's still recording. So useful.
It's the best. Well, thank you so much for coming. If you are watching this and new to the channel, please like, subscribe, do all those things that you know how to do on YouTube. It helps us so very, very much. If you're interested in being part of our community, we have a active and bouncing Discord server. I am posting it now in the chat. We have a lot of fun. We talk about writing. We talk about getting into a lot of mischief and shenanigans, mostly animal pics, honestly. It's a lot of fun. But also, you can find me on Deranged and Questing every Monday. It's also my, oh man, I am in the company of greats with Andy Peliquin, who is an amazing writer.
Very big
and we have a ton of fun. We do author interviews here on this channel, as well as lots of how-tos and fun things. So as I said, like, subscribe. Thank you, Jed, for coming on. You can find my books on Amazon, and have